Yeah, so today we remember our friend Ken Miller, and I've got that 22 jersey hanging there over my shoulder. That's the uniform they gave me when I became the voice of the Riders in 2022, the year there was the Grey Cup, and I got Jim Hobson to sign that. But I thought we'd turn it around today and make this about Ken Miller because in 2022, Ken Miller, along with Mike McCullough and Weston Dressler, were inducted into the Riders Plaza of Honor dinner. That's the only one I ever emceed, and I was very fortunate to be a part of that. It was great to be a part of that with those three gentlemen, three guys I called friends. And yeah, it's been a tough year in Rider Nation, losing George Reed last October, losing Jim Hobson here just in the spring, and losing Ken Miller this week. So I thought, why not have I could have intertwined interviews during the week, Ballsy Uncut, but I thought we need to have a Ken Miller celebration on his own. So I, over the last couple of days, got in contact with a few different people to get them to express to me what Ken Miller meant to them and, what Ken Miller meant to Rider Nation. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first guy I caught up with was Brendan Taman, who is the pro personnel director for the Ottawa Redblacks, getting ready for tonight's game against the BC Lions. Ken Miller is watching from heaven, all the CFL action, and he's proud of what Brendan Taman's done. Taman would, of course, after working with Ken, go on to lead the Riders to the Grey Cup championship in 2013, and now, after being with Montreal, has gone to Ottawa to be in their front office. So I had a chance to catch up with Brendan, get his thoughts on the passing of his friend, Ken Miller. All right, here with my good friend, Brendan Taman. Nice to talk to you, man. We don't talk as much as we used to. Last time you were rolling in here was for the Plaza of Honor when the 2013 team went in. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Anytime.
I wish it was under better circumstances. Our friend Ken Miller passing away very quickly from cancer. What's the first thing you think about when you think about Ken Miller?
Oh, man, a lot of things. He was such a good guy to work with. You've heard the term, I'm sure, a lot lately, father figure and whatnot, and he really was. He gave me a lot of good advice as we worked together for a few years there in Saskatchewan. So just a great guy, calm, loyal to the T with his players, and just treated people with the utmost respect, no matter who you were. And I had a lot of respect for him and learned a lot from him too. So yeah, it was tough. I wasn't realized that he was ill, and obviously I think it happened pretty quick. So really sad deal.
So is there one thing in terms of what he taught you that comes to mind, or is there something you reflect back on? Like, yeah, that's a Ken Millerism, so to speak.
I think he just reemphasized that you treat people with respect in the business, no matter who you are and no matter who they are. Players were obviously so thought highly of him, but it was a staff member, it was an outsider, it was a fan. He just reiterated that with me over and over again, that you treat people like you want to be treated yourself. And he was such an honest, good man. The one thing I feel bad for is he didn't get a Grey Cup in Saskatchewan, and when we won it in 13, I was thinking about that the other day. It was just really too bad Ken wasn't part of that, because of all the people that bled and died with that organization, it was Ken. And I know he was very happy that we did, but I was just going back to 9 and 10 when we lost those games, that was tough. He didn't get one himself.
Yeah, Craig Smith mentioned that, and we hear this so many times in sports, right? You need a championship to be a legend, to be considered legendary. Like you think of Kevin Glenn, or you think of Dan Marino. But there's a guy that's a legend, even though he didn't get a Grey Cup ring with the Riders, because really he was a part of setting a foundation to win that championship ultimately in the end.
Right, and I think he gets overlooked as being the OC in the 07 team when they won it. So now, Ken, you're right. He was, Grey Cup aside, whatever that turned out to be, he was, like you said, he was one of the best that's ever been through there. And it was a great hire. And like I say, he was so loyal to that place. He lived and breathed green and white. So we were very fortunate to work with him, the people that we did, and he'll always have a lasting impact on our careers.
So it was slightly, I think, before your time. But what do you think the better coaching job was for Ken Miller in '08 when they had all those broken legs? They had like 6 broken legs, and they still got to the playoffs. And maybe his downfall was he couldn't decide on what quarterback to use, and maybe used the wrong quarterback, Michael Bishop. Everybody makes a mistake. Was that a better coaching job, or 2010? Because I don't know of a better guy to keep that thing on the rails after the tragic 2009 ending.
Well, to be honest with you, Ballsy, I was going to say '09. When I got there, we were in a tough spot organization-wise. Eric had his challenges because he couldn't come into the office, and there was a lot of unclarity with how everything was getting done. And Ken just took that place by the horns and ran with it. And you wouldn't have known there was any kind of tough challenges ahead because he kept it away from the team. I really thought in '09 he was phenomenal. You wouldn't have known there was anything that was going on. And again, I'm a little biased because I was there in '09, but '08, you're right. I mean, he had a lot of adversity with those injuries. And in 10, we sort of kept rolling it over from 9, just to keep coming back from that loss. Is, like you said, it's unbelievable. But the way he handled it, and that was so Ken, even right after the game, you saw the clips. He went around to everybody and made sure they were all right, as a leader would do. And I'm a little biased when I say this, but I think '09 he was phenomenal. Even though we lost the game and we got to the Grey Cup, that was a tough year behind the scenes.
Take us, if you can, take us behind the scenes in the locker room after that. They're handing out hats. You guys have won the championship. Yeah. What's it like in the locker room, and how does a guy leaders lead from the front?
Yes.
How did he lead from the front?
Well, I've never seen a locker room like that after a game. There were so many emotions. There was madness. There was crying. There was physical frustration. There was shock, crying, anything you would think you could see in the span of a half hour to an hour after I don't know what kind of loss you call it. But Ken made a point of going around to everybody, whether you were a trainer or the equipment guys or the scouts, obviously the players. He went to everybody's locker, and what are you going to do? You just tap them on the back and just say, hey, hang in there. There's not much you can do. But that was, again, you saw everything you needed to see about Ken during those tough times. And he stood up and took every kind of challenge he had head on after that loss.
Did you guys get together ever personally, sit in a room and just like, what the heck happened, or share some tears or sorrow over that one yourself?
We did probably in 2010. We sat in his office and we didn't have a lot to say to each other. It was just sort of a blank, what happened back in November kind of thing, and how are we going to move on from it. And nobody has the answers, because I don't know if anybody's been through a loss like that ever in football. But the thing that he just reemphasized the positives, and that was so good about him. We had, him, good group of men in the locker room. The men term.
Yeah. What do riders do? They ride.
He was famous for those.
He was a grandpa. He was like Grandpa Ken. And I've touched on this with Schultz. I've touched on this with Craig Smith. I'll ask you the same thing. It's almost like you didn't want to let your grandpa down, right?
100%. Whether you're a player, and I know they did, staff included, Gordy, Ivan, all the group that was there. We all wanted to reward him for just him being him. You know what I mean? It's just he thought so highly of everybody in that building and in that organization alone. Nobody wanted to. It was hard to turn on Ken Miller, and he's such a good guy. And we wanted to do what's best as much as we could to help him be successful. And that's why I say it was too bad he didn't win one of those, because he deserved one more than anybody in that whole place. So
he did. You pointed out correctly. He did win at your expense, the 2007 Grey Cup, when you were GM of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But talk about that, because Ken Austin gets a lot of credit, as he should. But Ken Miller behind the scenes just talked about how smart of a football coach he was. Besides the whole leadership, I'm talking X's and O's.
Yeah, he had an uncanny ability just to come up with an idea that made a lot of sense that nobody really caught initially, if that makes sense. I know from talking to Paul LaPolice, who obviously speaks highly of Ken, because they worked together on that 17. When fellow coaches say what they say about Ken in their own domain, because I'm not a coach, but highly respected coach between coaches. Gary Echeverry thought the world of Ken, and Gary's been through a ton with varying coaches, varying backgrounds, and um, you know, our head coach right now thinks a lot of Ken, Coach Dites. So um, when you have that consistent rapport amongst your peers on how good and not only how good of a coach you are, but how good of a person you are, um, it goes a long way. But going back to the football part, he'd see things on video that, man, you've been watching this for a while because you picked up on that pretty quick. Just little knocks, and he was just. But he also let people do their jobs. He wasn't a micromanager. He believed in the people around him, and he let them go do their work. And I think that's what people liked about him so much.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you, because sometimes GMs, and you're not this way when you're a general manager, you let the guys coach, but sometimes GMs feel they have to indoctrinate themselves into the locker room or be in the kitchen, so to speak. You probably didn't ever have to worry about that with Ken Miller. You knew that he had command of the locker room and the sidelines.
Yeah, I mean, the reality of it, Ballsy, was when Ken was there with me, he was the boss, not me. I might have had a title or whatever the hell they called me, but Ken was the man in charge. And I knew we were in good hands. I didn't have to do anything that way because I knew he was going to have the room, and he always did. Obviously, 9 was a challenge with how the whole season went, and everybody focuses on the game. It was sort of a mirage of our season, just a bizarre way to end a 9 season that was up and down like an elevator. 10 was more consistently good. We were fairly consistent with what we were doing, and then in 11 it really went south. We hired Greg, obviously, who's with us now, ironically.
No, let me stop you. Let me stop you here, because two of my highlights, I got to the only Plaza of Honor I ever hosted was in 2022 when Miller, Dressler, and McCullough went in. So it was great to break bread with those guys and be kind of part of the induction ceremony. And the other great thing I had happen in my life was right before Jim Hobson passed away, we had lunch at his lake house for 3 hours. And one of the questions I asked him was this. Did you guys err in the way you handled the Greg Marshall situation, who you just mentioned? And he admitted maybe you did, because Ken Miller was such a huge figure. It wasn't Ken Miller's fault, but you guys allowed him to or he stayed on in a consulting role. And even when I asked some of the former players, they're like, yeah, Greg Marshall comes in. He's got a different style. He's kind of in your face. And Ken Miller's standing over there. And we've just gone to 2 Grey Cups with Ken Miller and, had some real good success with kind of a grandpa figure. We kind of like that style. And Jim agreed with me. He thought maybe that was a bit of a tactical error just because of how big of a personality and how beloved Ken Miller was.
Ballsy, and I haven't even talked to Greg about this, and he's with us, like I was saying, and it's ironic, but I don't think it mattered who we hired. We could have hired Corey Chamberlain, Greg Marshall, Richie Hall. It didn't matter who it was. Ken's aura and his presence was still there. And the reality was he still wanted to coach. That's the bottom line. I was there. I lived it. Trust me.
Yeah.
So it never really left his system till the end of 11. It was portrayed, and we thought it did leave in 10, but the reality is he still wanted to coach. So when we got off to the bad start that we did, the door was half open, and then that just opened it automatically. And did we make an error? I don't think so. I think he was the right choice, but I don't know if there was a right choice, if that makes sense.
No, it makes absolute sense. Hey, before we let you go here, Greg Marshall is on your staff, and your staff, your team, doing a great job right now at 6-2-1. And as we speak, got a game with the BC Lions here today. Just your thoughts on the start, and it's nice to see for those great Ottawa fans.
Yeah, it's also refreshing for us that have been here for 3 years. We were a little bit. Well, there was 1 year, I think, I don't know which one, we didn't win a game at home. So
yeah,
it is refreshing. And I think what's happened with this team, and it's a lot of credit to Sean Burke and Coach Dice, is this team has confidence now. We're in a close game, and it started with Winnipeg in game 1. They're first and goal, and I think they're 7 or 8 or whatever it was, and we stopped them. And ever since then, it started to grow. And we get into close games before, I think there was a tendency to go, okay, how are we going to blow this? Now, this team has learned how to win, and we believe we're going to win. And you know how it is, Ballsy. I mean, when you have that going for you, you got something special cooking. We have a long way to go. We're only halfway done. So we're off to a good start, but we need to finish this season strong and try to, obviously we're going to shoot for the playoffs and then make some runs in the playoffs if we can.
So I didn't want to make this about the team. Obviously, I just want to make it about Ken Miller. So let's tie this last thing into Ken Miller. Do you see a lot, and I don't want to compare, but I guess I am. Do you see some traits in Bob Dice that you saw in Ken Miller? Because I do. Kind of, a nice, gentlemanly guy, but can be fired up at times too if he has to be.
Well, Bob can get fired up and does get fired up more so than Ken did on the sideline. And I'm not referring to the incident at the end of the game the other day, but Bob's got some fire in him. But I think Bob also, he takes pieces from Dave Ritchie and people. I'm sure he's been around Doug Barry and Ken being one. Mm-hmm. I think a calm demeanor and rolling with the punches when adversity hits. You don't change who you are. You're the same guy. And I think Bob's always been like that anyway. But Ken wore on, Lapo, me, Bob, everybody that's been around him. Yeah. We learned a lot on and observed on how he dealt with things. And it automatically wears off on you because you just see the success that he had. You try to take pieces from him. And like I said, I love the time working with him, and I'll always share my experience with him in a good way.
Well, one of my favorite guys in the league, Brendan Taman, talking about one of my favorite guys in Rider history, Ken Miller. Thanks for your time, man. I appreciate it. Good luck against the Lions and the rest of the way. I thought when I started working for myself, I'd take weekends off, but we can't get away from not doing a tribute show to our friend Ken Miller. You knew him closer than I did, passing away at the age of 82, short battle with cancer. Scott, what's the first memory that pops into your head when you think of Ken Miller?
You know what? He was a very kind, unassuming gentleman outwardly, but when you got behind the locked doors of the locker room, he was every bit intense, a teacher, a guy that was all about winning for sure.
Mm-hmm. So did he get mad on the field at all? And when he got mad, like I feel like he's a Gene Mikowski type. Like Gene Mikowski doesn't say anything, and then when he says something, you listen. Is he that kind of guy? Was he that kind of guy, Ken Miller?
You hit it right on the nail on the head, Ballsy. Exactly like that. Didn't say too much. Didn't get too involved with all of the little scenarios. But when he spoke, people listened. And the one thing that I always thought was so fantastic about Ken was that he had this ability. No matter if you were from Moose Jaw or from Compton or anywhere in between, he could definitely connect with you and find some common ground. And then there's guys that needed a little extra love and attention. And Ken was a strong advocate for guys in the past and stood up for guys and was there for guys. So he was really well respected and beloved by everybody.
Scott, when you coach, it's and we'll get into your coaching in a second because you could take some of the things Ken taught you, but it's like equal and fair are two different words, but that's kind of how you have to coach. Equal, you know what I mean? And I think Ken mastered that.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was always able to balance the room, as it were. There wasn't, as I remember it, there wasn't a lot of drama back in those days. Everyone was fighting together and working together. And if you remember, and you look at those years, we had some pretty fantastic years.
Yeah, no kidding. He was, and you were a part of that too, probably the best stretch of Rough Rider football since I've been alive in terms of success. Now, you left partway through it to get into the big business world. Did you ever talk to him about that when you decided to leave and everything like that?
I kept it all pretty much, very, close to the chest, when those things happen. But Ken was the one that I actually had to contact to go and tell him I was going to retire. And so that process was kind of interesting, but also he was very, very understanding, and he was kind of shocked, and he made me feel pretty good because, he was, playing on the fact that, I was a big part of the team, but he understands the business of football, and he really supported me in that decision.
Yeah, he's the guy though, right? He's the guy that you don't want to let down, right? He was the grandpa Ken. You didn't want to let him down, right?
Well, 100%. And that's, even just with talking with some of my teammates like Jeremy and Luke, just discussing over text, a little bit about Ken's passing. Ken was you did not want to lose for the guy. He was the old grandpa, and I didn't have as much contact with him because he was offensive leaning and tuned that way. So I would always get regaled with the stories within the meetings on what he would say or his attitude, and I tell you, like, he was the type that, believe me, he did not want to take the foot off of their throats. He wanted to keep them down to the final 0-0.
Yeah, so he was probably the best coach, Scott, to have in place when that 13th man game happened. Do you know what I mean? And I actually think, this is the honest to gosh truth, I actually think because he was the coach, the controversy went away because people felt bad for Ken Miller.
You know what? I've never thought of that, Ballsy. That's a fantastic take. You know what? That could have played into it a little bit, but you know what? It's just how he dealt with it. He dealt with it head on. He answered the questions. He was very straightforward. And then I think you're right. At that point, you can't beat a dead horse, and you're looking at Ken Miller in the eyes and he's giving you an honest answer. It was time to move on. I think he did a good job of that.
Yeah, he certainly did. Hey, Scott, when you got a guy that's an offensive guy as the head coach, sometimes there can be a bit of division in the locker room. Like, he likes the offense, he doesn't like the defense. Could he balance that pretty good?
Oh, very much so. I mean, if anything, it was what he developed, and I think, what the theme was, we played for each other. And, for defense, we didn't want to be on the field. Like, we wanted to be 2 and out, get them out. Let's give the offense the ball as many times as we can because they're the one that score the points. And so it was really a back and forth like that. And, I'm sure that, I can remember there was definitely rough spots. But we were able to get through that with that kind of mentality, and he really brought the two sides, the three sides of the locker room together for sure.
Ken Austin, and rightfully so, gets a lot of credit for that 2007 Grey Cup winning season, but he was the offensive brains behind everything up there, either on the sidelines or up in the booth, right?
Well, that's what I mean. Like I said, I didn't have a ton of contact with him as a coach because, he's offense. He was on the offensive side of the ball. So then when we would get back and we would have these great, battles in practice, offense versus defense, and the ones against the starters against the starters. And then you'd hear, how he reacted to something in the video room or his mentality. That was what was so special. And you could see how he was, with his guys, the cover was pulled back, but he would do a great job of being able to bring everyone together.
Hey, you're a busy guy, got the family on the go there, so I'm going to ask you one more question. You're coaching now. You get to kind of be a Ken Miller again at Balgonie with Marco Ricci, Andrew Green, just to talk about that and how you might take a little Ken Miller influence onto the field and reshaping and getting the culture going again in Balgonie.
Really exciting. I've always coached my kids' sports, whether it was I helped out with the grappling in the early days and been definitely through it for about 4 or 5 seasons of flag football. And I started coaching tackle when my son got into it in Pee Wee and then Bantam. And now he's in high school at Greenhall. And we had a great opportunity to be brought in there and help out. And it's contagious. Like, when you get away from football, you don't think about it as much. But once you get that little spice or spark back in your life of football, you're in whole hog. I'm down the rabbit hole. I'm looking at teaching videos online on YouTube. I'm sending texts to my coaches at nighttime, at all hours. I mean, it's exciting. And we start today. Training camp kicks off at 4 p.m.
All right, man. Well, thanks. Get to the field. Have a great time. And let's remember Ken Miller. He was one of the best.
Thanks for having me on, Ballsy. I appreciate it.
Radio, wanting to be in radio, and now we're talking on a computer. Can you believe this?
Well, it's a different world, isn't it?
It is crazy, man. And I tell you what, it is a treat for me to talk to you. What have you been doing in retirement life so far?
The best thing about retirement life, you do whatever you want, when you want, and if you want. It's been great, Michael.
So what are you doing? Like, do you camp? Do you watch all the sports? Do you get out in the yard, or what do you do?
Just about everything that you said at some point, at some time. We have grandchildren we enjoy visiting with and spending time with. And yes, we do things for ourselves. And yeah, love the yard, love the garden, want
Yeah.
a summer, and watch every sports game that I can.
Are you still playing music too?
And that too, absolutely.
Awesome, man. Yeah, you know what? A lot of coaches sleep under their desk and everything like that. You were a guy that got up early in the morning and didn't go till the middle of the afternoon. So you got kind of a coach's mentality. Let's talk about one of the great coaches. I don't know. You were around this team a long time, the Rough Riders, being an iconic sideline host. Do you remember a more beloved coach?
You know, you get to see different personalities in coaching. And yes, it was a long time. Nearly 30 years, right from the inception of our broadcasts.
Mm-hmm.
But you see the coaches and you see their different personalities and you see how they react. You get a real feel for them. And there have been many with every possible personality. But when we talk about Ken Miller, and that's what we're going to talk about, there was truly, and we hear this overused, that he was a father figure.
Mm-hmm.
It was just that. He would be just like your father, who would walk into the room, ask you the question, and wait for you to answer. He didn't want to leave until you finished. But he had that gentle personality, yet he meant business. He was a very intellectual person, one who understood sports from one end to the other. But he was one of a kind, one that I will never forget.
Yeah, they can be, and I did the visiting sidelines with you while you were doing the home sidelines, and you get guys after losses, and some can be real jerks. But Ken, how was he when you dealt with him every time, win or lose?
You know what was nice? Every game prior to the game, when the Riders came out on the sideline, and I loved the intimacy of Old Taylor Field.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's like the old stadium was here in hockey. But Old Taylor Field, you walk out, everybody's right there at the sideline. Ken would walk out. We'd virtually shake hands, and you'd wish him well for the game. When the game was done, I had the fortune of being in the locker room, in the weight room, where we did the post-game interviews. We would get the stars of the game, but we were first, because of the broadcaster, to get the coach. And Ken would walk in, and we would sit down. We would shake hands again. Then we would just talk briefly about, the game, how he felt, the emotions. Yeah, win or lose, he had an emotion. He was concerned. But you know who he was concerned about most? The boys, the men in the room. What they went through to get to what the result was, there was always a concern. And I always thought, yes, it could be better, it could be worse, but they gave everything they had that particular day, but we're going to get better. And under his tutelage, they obviously did. They had a tremendous time. I mean, he was here for 5 seasons. And the greatest event, I want to go to it directly, was the 13th man game.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget that. To me, it was one of the most emotional times in my sideline football career, because I was right there with Ken, because the Riders are winning the Grey Cup.
Yeah.
I was about 2 feet from him to put my arm in his hand, because I had the good fortune of broadcasting on the national radio network that went right across North America to the Armed Forces radio. So we would get the first comment. I had my hand ready to go to Ken to say, congrats, the flag. It was a shock, as everybody has felt. But I had the good fortune to go into that locker room immediately with the team. All other media have to wait that 15, 20-minute period till everybody settles down. We went into that locker room, and they put us in a very exquisite place. It was the janitor's room. A room full of brooms and mops and pails and detergents. And there was Ken, there was our technical man. And the thing is, when you lose a game that big, what do you say? What do you ask? What's the question you ask? And I said to Ken, what can you say? And he looked at me, and that he had an emotion on his face. He said, what can you say? It was devastating. It was tough. But I feel for all the men in that room. Really, that said it all. I mean, what do you ask someone hurting that bad after a chance like that? I'll never forget that as long as I live. And that was truly what that man was. He was human. He was the man for the men.
Do you Willie? This is I said this to Scott Schultz earlier on this show, to Brendan Taman. He seemed like to be the right guy at the right time for a situation like that, because people still talk about the 76 Gabriel touchdown and what horrific it was, and they actually, a lot of people, I guess it depends on your age, are more mad about that than the 13th man. Like you said, they won the Grey Cup. They're handing out hats. Willy Cole's going to interview Ken Miller. Confetti's going to fall. And then with zeros on the clock, the Riders lose. If this was in the NFL, Willie, they would have talked about it for months. There would be a 30 for 30 documentary on ESPN. And it kind of just... it didn't go away, but it did go away. And I think a lot of it had to do with Ken Miller, and everybody felt bad for Grandpa Ken. Do you know what I mean?
That's right. It's how he handled it. He handled it with grace, with respect. He hurt harder than anybody you could ever imagine. He showed slight emotion, I would say controlled emotion, but as a professional coach and an athlete, I remember walking through that locker room and seeing a Claremont beat up like you've never seen before in your life, or something like that. They were hurt. They were hurting physically, but hurting emotionally. There was every emotion in the room. I saw that in the 2007 championship. 2009 was something like this. But Ken Miller, somehow, he brought in that calming fatherly effect. He meant business. This man was a businessman. He was there for a reason. But everybody had his respect. I would say everybody, because we don't know all the ins and outs inside the room. But I think for the most part, the majority thought, whatever this guy says, we're going to do it. And like, he allowed the guys to go and watch the post-game film and break it down themselves with the coaches. What coach does that? You've been there. The coach should come in, you'll watch a post-game film. He's going to grind you for what you did. They had the guys come through and find out the issues that they had, and then get together, discuss it, and improve upon it. And he allowed that to happen. Who does that? Not many coaches.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because Kerry Joseph, who I had in the show just before you, saying the same thing. In 2007, Coach Miller would go to him and say, you know what? You got the wristband. How would you go out there and call some plays yourself and have some fun with it? And Kerry would look at him and go, are you kidding me? He goes, no, go have some fun. We trust you. We've practiced all week. What coach would do that?
The Kerry Joseph story is something I will not forget either. Being in Toronto at that time, Kerry and I actually had walked from the sideline to the dressing room at that time. He was so emotional about the win. Of course, the MVP and all of that was happening at the time. But he said, everybody didn't have that trust in me. He didn't use the word Ken, but they gave me the opportunity and trust to go ahead and do what I had done at that time. And of course, you have to think of Kent Austin as well in this whole package. But it's that sort of thing that you see through Ken Miller. He brought a lot of that into that room, created a harmony. You've got to still have the talent. And that talent has to perform. Without performance and talent, nothing's going to happen. But it was a combination of everything that molded together into a glue that gave them the success they had.
Well, I'm glad that he got the championship in 2007, and you were in the locker room to celebrate that, because he did get a Grey Cup ring. Unfortunately, and even Brendan Taman said this, we wish we would have won one with him as the head coach, but he definitely, Willie, as you can attest to, helped set the table for what was the most memorable night in Rider history in 2013. Like, he was the groundwork to lay down the bricks for that.
Exactly. It takes a while to build those. I think we're sort of in that building block right now. And hopefully, as we put the pieces together here, we can see that happen. And I would just like to extend sincerest condolences to the Miller family and his lovely wife, Maureen, who loved Saskatchewan like nobody I know. They came back here to enjoy it.
Yeah, and you raised a good point, and nobody's brought that up yet. The Rider head coach, it's the premier, and then it's the Rider head coach. And she's almost like a first lady, right? Like, he's busy over here, but she's doing her charity work, and she's glad handing because he's not out.
What coach's wife went to the practices to watch? Maureen.
Exactly.
You're sold not only in what your husband does, but you love the game, and you just love to be there with it all, where you absorb it all.
Yeah. And Willie, you mentioned this this edition of the Rough Riders. I'm not around the team like I have been in past years, but just from afar and from what I know about him, Corey Mace seeming to take on some of the traits that Ken Miller did in terms of being a gentleman, being there for his guys. You know, when a guy's injured, he comes over and checks on him. When he scores a touchdown, he gives him a high five. I think players want to play for guys like that.
Well, you know, I'm watching from a distance, as you are. You're closer. You should be there.
Yeah.
But I'm watching from a distance, and I see that. I love that the image he possesses on the sideline. I think he's giving his players the opportunity. There are moments you got to work on a lot of things, but I'm hoping that this is going to stabilize a situation that we're a little shy in. And I think with what's happening, and let's hope they can stay healthy.
Yeah, that's the key. It is the key. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Lastly, Willie, you've been around a long time in media and watching this team, like you said, over 30 years on the sidelines. I can't remember off the top of my head a West Division where the floor and the ceiling are so tight.
Well, the teams are losing, teams are winning. Then teams are winning, teams are losing. We're in a snug fest in here.
Yeah.
Show up. Teams are coming back with injured players, and that puts a boost in. We think that, BC Lions are going to take off like a rocket because we got Rourke back. But as you saw, it's going to take some time for everybody to do it. This is going to be the toughest West to win ever in a long time. And it's going to be, I'll call it a crapshoot on this one. That, whoever comes to the game ready to go, and it's not going to be one now. It's going to be one at the very end. It's going to be a very close race. Watch out for Edmonton.
Yes. It's funny. I'm glad you brought that great minds think alike, or I tag team your great mind. Listen, Winnipeg and Edmonton have been the best teams in the West the last little bit.
A good friend of mine in Winnipeg who's been an Edmonton fan and season ticket holder told me a while ago, as Winnipeg was getting into it, he said, the Bombers are getting old. And I said, be patient with them because a lot of changes on that Bomber team. Look at what's happening right now. The machine, the gears are meshing. Things are happening. Injured players are coming back. Things are starting to work in their favor. They're a monster that will snake bite you in a heartbeat. So hang in there.
Well, Willie, lastly, in the heart of your covering the CFL, the Edmonton Eskimos were juggernauts. They were the team. They had so much cash they were buying other entities. Okay, like now they're a privately owned team. Do you ever see a time where every team in the CFL is privately owned?
I guess it can work, but you have to have the right owner.
Yeah,
that's the issue. I mean, you'll have to have deep pockets, expect to lose, hope to win.
Yeah.
And winning is the game. I mean, if your team wins, it seems, as you saw here in our years, we're on telethons raising money for the riders. We're selling grain trucks, loads of grain. We're doing everything to have the riders survive. The Tom Shepherds and the lotteries and everything else to keep this team here and a owned organization. But hopefully, I mean, the Take the Elks, I really have a tough time with that name. However, Edmonton, I hope that what they just pulled in the last 2 or 3 games will bring back the fan in the stands. It takes once you lose them, it's hard to get them back.
2 things I remember about breaking into radio, I could talk to you forever, was James Allen. When I started in the newsroom, he would come in and he'd have red pen all over my scripts. And it was very kind of nerve-wracking. But as you knew you were getting better when less and less of the red marks on your scripts. And Willy Cole would call you once in a while and ask you about your grammar. So I got to ask you this question. Is it elk or elks?
It's Edmonton.
I love it, man. I love it. Hey, Willie, it's great talking to you, man. You're looking awesome. And I'll tell you what, breakfast on me for the first time sometime soon, okay?
You got it.
Thanks, buddy.
We'll supersize it.
Okay. You're with our buddy Craig Smith. Craig, we've lost some good ones here. A stretch of good ones going down. George Reed, Jim Hobson to cancer, and now another friend of ours, Ken Miller, to cancer. and given your own health battles, that's really got to hit home for you.
Well, I tell you, I got the diagnosis in 2017, and when you get that, you just wonder how long you're going to last. And I'm sitting here, and like I was just talking to you, I don't have much of a life, but I'm still kicking, and I'm seeing a lot of these good, great people. They're passing away, and it's tough. It's very difficult. It hits home because a lot of these guys I knew and I loved and I worked with and admired, and then the other guy that I I really loved was Dan Durazio. He was another one. Like last week, he was a Saskatchewan Rough Rider coach, and we lost him last week or so. So it's tough.
Yeah. So actually, I haven't really touched on it with anybody here about Durazio. Tell me about Dan, because he was going into his second year coaching at UBC.
Yeah. It was a shock because I got an email from or a text from Mike Benavides saying that Dan had passed away, and I said, "What?" Like if you looked at him, he was a picture of health. There wasn't an ounce of fat on his body. He was a guy that if you watched him on the stair steppers, you just think, "Wow, this guy's a maniac. It's unbelievable." And and then all of a sudden, same thing. He had some issues in May and June with his legs, and then all of a sudden, then they found that he had cancer, and then boom, it was one just like Ken. It was such a quick thing, and bang, gone. Like,
yeah.
Who would have thought that?
Yeah. Now, Ken lived, I think, 10 years longer than Dan. Your first impressions of Ken Miller, because you didn't work with him long, but what were your first thoughts when you met Ken Miller? Because that was coming off the 2009 13th Man Grey Cup.
Yeah. Well, I met Ken in, I think it was 2002 or 2003 when he was the offensive line coach with Toronto. And I remember meeting him, just outside the dressing rooms at BC Place, and had a chat with him. And I walked away thinking, like, not a loquacious man, had that deep voice, and he wasn't a yappy guy, but you could tell that he would gain respect from players. And then of course in 2010, Brendan was wanting to hire me, and I kind of went through the process, and Ken took me to lunch at Red Lobster, and we had got to start to learn about Ken Miller and what he was like. I found out he was a baseball coach. That's the thing about Ken. Like I just admire him so much. I had admired him so much because of what he did. Like I love baseball. He was a baseball coach. He, I remember one day when we were just before practice, he said, "Man, you know what? I would give a ton of money just to go hit some fungos," and that that was Ken. Like he loved the game, and he was a Dodger fan. I was a Yankee fan, so we kind of had and his wife Maureen is a huge Yankee fan, so we were always on the Yankee side, but he took me for lunch, and I started to get to know him. I remember when we drove back to the facility, I said, "Coach, that was just an unbelievable way to lose a game." I said, I just can't imagine, And he said, "Yeah." He said, I still haven't been able to watch it, and I don't know to this day whether he ever did or not. But yeah, that's a tough thing. But that's when I, started to get to know him and really admired him. Like he was a guy that he wasn't an in-your-face guy, but his voice spoke volumes. It was just incredible what he did, and then the artwork. I don't know if you ever saw. Yeah. I was friends with him, and I couldn't believe, like, he would post stuff, and I said, "Ken, that's fantastic." He said, "Thank you very much, Craig." Kathy would always post on Kathy's Facebook about whatever. It could be her garden or whatever, the bird pictures that Kathy would take
because he wanted to paint them.
Because he wanted to paint them, and he was just a guy that you just loved, you know. He's just a guy that was just the best guy.
He was a guy. He was a guy. Talk to Scott Schultz. He's a guy that you didn't want to let down, right? He was like a grandpa. You didn't want grandpa to be disappointed in you.
Absolutely, that's a good way to put it. You know, like a grandpa that everybody loved and respected, and they don't mess with grandpa, you know. But yeah, he was such a great guy, and you know, it's so funny because in 2010. I was scouting in San Francisco, and I was in my hotel room in San Francisco, and I got a call from Ken. And Ken, you know, the deep voice, I'd like you to check out these two guys to see if they would, you know, do some scouting for us. So, and I've heard this before, and I'm like, oh, here we go, you know. But so I called the first guy, and he didn't want to do it. And then I called the next guy, and it was Ted Bilderback, and I'm sure you've come across Ted, and well, I'll do it. I became best friends with Ted, and I still am. And Ted's the one who, actually, Ted texted me last Monday saying that Ken's in the hospital and he's got cancer all over his body. And I went, oh, God. And he said, hoping for the best. And then all of a sudden, it was yesterday at about 3:45, he said Maureen just sent him a text saying that Ken passed. I'm like, you know, I mean, this, I almost swore, but this bastard cancer, you know.
Yeah, hey, you could swear if you want, man. That's it's a terrible thing. I often say fuck cancer.
Yes.
So, Craig, I had brought this up to Scott Schultz. I'll bring this up to you, see if you agree. So in Saskatchewan, I was only 4 when this happened. Tony Gabriel scores a touchdown. Everybody knew the ball was going to him, wins the Grey Cup, Clements to Gabriel, and everybody still talks about that as the most heartbreaking thing. But to me, it was the 2009 Grey Cup. And if it would have been in the NFL where this happened, there would have been a 30 for 30 documentaries everywhere. They would have been talking about this thing for 4 or 5 months, but it kind of just went away. And I think it kind of went away. I've hypothesized that it kind of went away because Grandpa Ken was the coach and everybody felt bad for Grandpa Ken. So it just kind of went away. I believe, and Scott said, you know, I never thought of it that way, but it probably had something to do with it.
To me, that's in any league, anywhere. That was the worst thing that could happen to a team. You think about it, zeros on the clock. They won the Grey Cup. Hats were getting distributed. They won the Grey Cup. Wait a minute, there was flags. Flags where there was a problem with the special teams where one guy went on.
Yep.
You know, and then all of a sudden, you know, he was the other guy that went on the other field to make it 13, thought that guy came off, and things happen, right? I mean, it just...
Yeah.
That can happen in the preseason, and you don't think about anything of it. When it happens, the last game of the Grey Cup, it's a killer. But that's a tough. That is the toughest way. And you know, I mean, I've followed this league since '62. I mean, I watched the '66 Grey Cup when Ronnie and George and Dale Weston, etc., won the Grey Cup, and it was really, really cool to see Regina, Saskatchewan, win the cup. And then I was in the stands in '89 when they won with. Tony Champion's catch and Ridgway's kick, and then I was, 2007, where the week before Kevin Glenn gets hurt and Dinwiddie's got to play, and they win the Grey Cup, and then I was involved in 2010, where it was one of the better days of my CFL career, where we went and we won, and you know, and then it's so funny because when I came here, I said to both Ken and Brendan, I said, you know, when I want to come here. I want to get a green ring. Mm-hmm. I want some confetti, and I want to be in a parade.
Yeah.
And we got it. We got it all.
Yeah, so, you know, and I think Ken was the perfect man for that 2010 team, because I don't know who could have kept that team on the rails after the 2009 debacle. But you guys come out in 2010, and the very first game was that beautiful double overtime victory over Montreal in overtime with the Richardson catch in the back of the end zone. You actually got a 13th man penalty in that game, to be honest with you, if you remember that.
Yeah.
I was so ticked off watching that thing. And then to get back to the Grey Cup, like, you got to give Ken credit. That might have been his best coaching job. You know, that or the 2008 when they had all the broken legs.
Yeah, well, it was unreal what they did with all those injuries, and they just kept on rolling. 2010, that Montreal game, that was my very first game as a Saskatchewan Rough Rider, and I walked out of there after, I think, man, this could be like this every game. And then that day I got freaking hail damage, because if you remember, just before the game there was hail, and
Yeah.
other guys in the parking lot, they didn't get it, and I got freaking hail damage. So it was crazy, but I would have taken hail damage, to get those wins and all that time. And remember Weston making the play in the end zone, and it was, yeah, and it kept it together. And Ballsy, at halftime of a Grey Cup, I'm walking back to the dressing room with Brendan, and I said, Brendan, we're up 3 points in the Grey Cup. This is great. Well, as it turned out, we lost by 3 points, and it was a tough loss, and tough for Ken. And geez, if I could change something, I would sure give that man a Grey Cup ring. And I know a Grey Cup ring doesn't say everything about a person, but it sure would have been nice for Ken to get that and have that, and just wasn't in the cards, and that's the way it is.
Well, I think too many people and I'm not cutting you down, but I think too many people make claims that you got to win to be a legend. Dan Marino, there's lots of guys that didn't wear a ring, and this guy is definitely one of the legendary guys in Rough Rider history. Probably the most beloved coach in Rider history. I can't think of any others that are more beloved. Like, I know guys have won championships, but I don't know of anybody that doesn't like Ken Miller.
Well, if you're on social media and have seen posts, I mean, you name it, there's people that have just come out and just poured their hearts out for that man. And it could be, somebody in the front office. It could be somebody, the ticket ladies, people that are all across, fans, people in, coaches, you name it. I mean, it's just incredible, that everybody loved him. He was just such a great, great guy. And it was fun to be around him and just listen to him. It's tough. It's just one of those things that, that's life, right? I mean, it's just that's the way it goes. And you just never know. Again, hug your daughter, hug your wife, hug everybody, because you just never know what's going to happen. Even young. I mean, you think of Durazio. I mean, he wasn't young, but still, picture health and bang.
Yeah.
Dan's gone,
Well, we're glad that you're here to reminisce about Ken Miller. We'll have you on the show as we go along, but thanks for your kind words on Ken Miller and his legacy.
Well, I appreciate it. And I just wanted to say, I really appreciate your love for the Canadian League, Canadian football, college football in Canada, and for high school, junior, you name it. I mean, you are a champion of all those different leagues in Canada, and I think it's fantastic. I saw the Marco Ricci interview, and I thought that was fantastic. Anyway, that's just
Hey,
I don't always agree with you, but hey, let me tell you something. It's very, very, very cool what you do for Canadian football.
Well, you're a beacon of knowledge. I'll scratch your back too, man. It's always great to pick your brain. And hey, you do have a life. You got a life here as long as you want it on this show, my friend. We'll talk to you soon.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right, here with the quarterback's coach, the Chicago Bears Rider legend, Kerry Joseph. Hey, KJ, before we get to Ken Miller, that's what I want to talk about. I've been watching Hard Knocks, and I have to say, every time I see you, I get a smile on my face. Where did you come up with the whole slip and slide routine for these guys to learn how to slide correctly?
Well, it's something that I did when I was playing ball back in my college days. It's just, it's hard to practice that. And I was a guy that I was very stubborn. I didn't want to slide. So even though I was a baseball guy, but I had the opportunity to practice that, and I thought about that, and I ran it by the head coach. And, when you think about some of our quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, they didn't play baseball. So I thought it was pretty cool. Brought the idea up. Coach was on board with it. And it was a great opportunity to cool off at the end of training camp of a warm day. And it's been working. The guys have been sliding in the games. So, hey, it's fundamental proof.
Yeah, and isn't it nice when you come up with an idea and they execute it in the game, and then they come over and say, "Hey, coach, that worked." Kind of gives some street cred and validation to your coaching, doesn't it?
It does. You know what? And we having a little competition with it to see who has the better slide. So so we're able to make some fun with it. But that's just me with coaching. I tell the guys that any drill work that we're going to do, it's going to be something that pertains to the game. Now,
Yeah.
we're not going to just do drills just to do drills. We're
Yeah.
going to make it efficient and something that we use in the game.
So, Kerry, you got a lot of trust from Ken Miller, who I believe told you, hey, you got plays on your wristband. Go out and have some fun. Why don't you have some fun? Why don't you call some plays? Just talk about him doing that for you and how that, makes you feel as a player when a coach turns that over to you.
You know what? Between Ken Miller and Kent Austin, the preparation that they gave us as quarterbacks leading into a game was just tremendous. And one thing you knew that going into a game, you was prepared. You knew exactly what you wanted to call in certain situations. So we'll get into a game and, you come over and Coach Miller had that little smile that he would always give you. And he said, "Hey, kid, how you feeling?" I'm like, "Feeling good. Feel real good. Feeling in the flow of the game." And he looked at me and he said, "You want to call the next drive?" And then you can hear Kent in the background. He okays it. So Kid Miller says, "Hey, why don't you go call the next one?"
Yeah.
And you go out there, you call the game, and you take a drive down and you score. You feel good about it. And if you don't, you punt it and you make your adjustments. And it was a couple of times that I've called a couple of drives within the game.
Yeah. So, Kerry, I was very happy that Ken Miller got to have that Grey Cup championship in 2007 as an offensive coordinator. He came close, as you would know, with the Rough Riders as a head coach in 2009 and 2010, 13th man game, and then losing to Montreal again the next year. So I did feel bad for him there that he didn't quite get the championship, but I was glad he got to win it with you in 2007. A lot is made of what Ken Austin did for that team, but talk about what Ken Miller did for that team offensively behind the scenes.
He did a lot. Kent had a lot to do with just an overall big picture because he was the head coach. He was very involved in the offense, but he had a lot of trust in Ken Miller to make sure to meet with us as the quarterbacks, to make sure everything that was game plan wise was in line. So he had a big part of that offense, and just the maturity he brought, the knowledge he brought with the game, how he helped us as quarterbacks to understand what we were looking for. It was just tremendous. I mean, he was a ball of wisdom, and he had a big part in that success in 2007.
Mm-hmm. So I've talked to, I know a lot of the guys are my friends, McCullough, the list goes on and on. Schultz, I talked to him on this show, and all of them to a man. Even Brendan Taman said, you just didn't want to let Grandpa Ken down. You didn't want to let Ken Miller down. Do you fall into that category too?
Yes, I do. You know what? When you have a legendary coach that has been around the game for a long time, the respect that you have for him, not just as a coach, but as a man, you never want to let him down. And because you knew that he was a player's coach, he was there for you on and off the field, and you just wanted to do whatever you could do to make sure that he was successful also.
Mm-hmm. So I was talking to Willy Cole on this show, and he's a longtime radio announcer, and he was on the sidelines for many of the games. And he said you told him a story about Ken Miller and how Ken Miller really said something that meant a lot to you at Grey Cup week. Can you explain that to me, what he said to you Grey Cup week? Because that was, it was the lead up to the MOP, and that was really your best year in the league, let's be honest.
It's, sometimes people say things to you that it just sticks with you. Mm-hmm. And I remember being out on the practice field. It was in the Sky Dome, and I know the MOP ceremony was coming up for the awards. Mm-hmm. And he looked over to me and he said, "Kid," he always would say kid or young man. That was his deal. And he said, "I know you have that award coming up, and you've done a tremendous job. It's well deserved." He said, and I would be very, he said, "Now let me say it this way." if you don't win the MOP award, I think time will stop.
Wow.
And I was like, wow. And I was like, just looked at him and I said, Coach, I appreciate that. He said, no. He said, you have earned it. You deserve it. And I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. And I just would never forget that moment right there in the middle of practice for him to even think that highly of me and the work that I've helped put in to help the team to accomplish what we accomplished.
It's a frustrating start to the Grey Cup for you. Things weren't going the way that you wanted in that game. You were playing against Ryan Dinwiddie. Kevin Glenn wasn't playing. It wasn't going your way. Did he help you in that game kind of, realize that you're Kerry Joseph, you can get this done?
He did. You know what? We're playing against Greg Marshall defense. And Greg Marshall going into that game wasn't a big man coverage team. Yeah. And for some reason, they flipped the script on us and they started playing a lot of man. I didn't start off throwing the ball well, with the, I don't know if it's the Grey Cup hype, but we just wasn't connecting on all cylinders. But one thing that coming to the sideline, Ken Austin, Ken Miller, they said they want to play a lot of man coverage. He said, but nobody's spying you. So just go be Kerry Joseph. If it's not there in the past game, take off running and be great. And I started doing that, started opening some things up. And shoot, I think I rushed for over 100 yards in that game. And we made the big play to Andy Fantus and, just went play football. So I was able to kind of just relax, take a deep breath. And that's one thing he was always good for, just to kind of get you to just come down a little bit. Because, he was very mellow. Mm-hmm. Didn't get upset, didn't get too excited. And he would just say, go play football and be yourself.
How did you know if he was ever if he wasn't that bombastic? How did you ever know if he wasn't happy with something you did or something the offense was doing or wasn't doing?
That was a hard task, because it really was, because his tone and his voice never changed. Mm-hmm. He never was a guy to scream and to holler. He was just always talking to you with much respect. Yeah. But when he spoke, it was wisdom. When he spoke, you knew that it was something that you need to really listen to. And we just always had that level of respect for him, and he had the respect for us as players.
I said earlier that he'd never won a Grey Cup as a head coach. He won it with you in 2007. And we know what happened. You got traded off to the Toronto Argonauts. You were like a shooting star here. And that's one of the Riders in 2008 had all those broken legs. And in the end, they kept winning and winning, finding a way, but couldn't settle on the quarterback. I wonder, did you guys ever have a conversation after you got traded, you and him, about that situation? Because I really feel like had you stayed, in hindsight, you could have won back-to-back championships if you were the quarterback of the Riders then.
I really believe we could have gone back-to-back that in 2008 if I would have stayed there. Yeah. I know when I came back to play against the Riders and speaking to Coach Miller, we talked about that. And I told him, I said, Coach, I really wanted to stay. I wish I could have stayed, and I would have loved to play for him and to be a part of that again. But then I told him, I said, but you got a good quarterback. And I know that you're going to have success as a coach. But we did talk about that my first time returning back to Saskatchewan to play against the Riders.
When the Riders lost that 2009 Grey Cup, you weren't a part of it, obviously, but it was the 13th man. Everybody knows it. I think you could see from afar, though, the Riders had the right man running the team to kind of deal with a situation like that. To have Grandpa Ken in the locker room to console the guys would have been the right coach at that time.
It was. You know what? He was the perfect fit to take over that football team. I thought they made the right decision to allow him to lead the Riders. And unfortunately, they had that incident in that field goal on that play there. And I felt really bad for him because, not only the guys that were on the team that you knew, but him as a coach and the way he led that team, you would just really wish he could have got that championship as a head coach.
Okay, Kerry, to let you go here, but I want to ask you, what do you take from what you learned from Ken Miller, not only as a coach, but a man, and apply it to what you've done through your whole journey as a coach now? You've been, McNeese, you've been with the Seahawks, you're with the Bears now with the #1 overall pick. Is there anything you take from Ken Miller to what you're doing now today?
You know what? It's just about that even keel. You see me, my emotions, I do get fired up, but I'm just very calm demeanor, and just building a relationship with the players. That's one thing that I had a lot of respect for Ken. Ken is just the relationship that he built with us. Myself, Durant, Marcus Crandall. We spent a lot of time with him, and he was like that grandfather to us. So for me, just taking that into my quarterback room of really just nurturing, building that relationship, letting the guys know that at the end of the day is about me caring for them and giving them everything that they need to be successful as players.
Okay, I'm going to let you give one message to Maureen and the family in a second, but I do want to say this. I'm watching this Caleb Williams play, man. This guy he's like a video game. What are you teaching him there? He's running around looking awesome, man.
Hey, we just working every day. We try to get 1% better every day, and we do our drill work. We do everything that we need to do to be successful, and then his superpower, his God-given gifts, just take over on the field, and I just sit back and watch and enjoy the show.
You can't be that even keel when you see that kid pull off stuff like that. Like the Kerry Joseph that I know has got to be fired up on the sidelines.
Oh, I get a little fired up now. You'll see the wow come out of me every now and then when he does some special things. But it's been good. It's going to be fun working with him, coaching him, and just giving him and pouring into him all my football knowledge. And it's been a great start so far.
All right, man. So enough about the Bears. Best of luck. 4-0 in the preseason. That means nothing but best of luck. But lastly, just anything you want to say to Maureen and the family, anybody watching this about Ken Miller, and some closing thoughts from you.
Yeah, I just really want to say, Miss Maureen, to the Miller family, grandkids, kids, to friends, just know that my heart is broken. I know your heart is broken. I'm sending prayers from myself and my family to you all, and just asking God to just give y'all the strength through this time of healing and this time of mourning the loss of a great coach, but more importantly, a great man, a great husband, father, grandfather. Love you all. Thank you all for everything. And just know that we all know he's truly going to be missed. And he definitely left a legacy behind for everyone to cherish and to continue to celebrate.
Absolutely, man. You know what? Good trees produce great fruit. And his tree, the Ken Miller tree, produced a guy like Kerry Joseph. So his legacy will live on in a guy like you. Thanks for your time, man. Appreciate it. We'll catch up later down the season, okay?
Okay. Talk to you later.